Good morning. We're learning as discussed for Shleima Filan Chaya Basarach, and for Basiyam Bas Chaya, we're on the bottom of Kuf Amid Beis. It's 2 lines from the bottom. Gufa. Ha'eichel gid hanosha shel behema tmeya. Someone who eats a gid hanosha of a non-kosher animal. Rabbi Yehuda Mechayev Shtayim, Rav Shimon Paiter. Rabbi Yehuda says Yechayev for both eating a non-kosher animal. You ate a giraffe, and you also ate the gid hanosha of a giraffe. You're going to be chayiv for two things. And Rav Shimon says you're potter altogether. In fact, Rav Shimon Manavshach, why are you chayiv, not chayiv anything? Isser chalal isser. If you say that an isser can be chal on a second isser, l'chayiv na mishum git, should be also not. You should be chayiv not only for eating the non-kosher animal, but for eating also for the isser of gid hanosha. He ain't isser chalal isser if you don't hold it. If Rav Shimon disagrees, he says isser cannot be chalal isser. L'chayiv mishum tumah dekadim. Certainly the isser tumah, the isser of a behemoth tmeya did not come after the isser gid hanosha. So how could you not be chayiv on it? So you'll say, why is it that you're not chayiv on the isser gid of the isser tumah? The aim begidim and tam. If you're saying the reason you're not chayiv for the isser of a behemoth tmeya is because you only ate the gid, and the gid is not edible, and there's no isser of eating a non-kosher animal when you eat the inedible parts, like a sinu, or a hoof, or a horn. L'chayiv bishum gid. Okay, so you're saying you can't be chayiv for isser tumah. So it's not an isser chalal isser situation. It's just an isser gid. Isser gid. The Torah said you're not allowed to get a nosher, regardless of whether it's of edible or not. So where does he get from that you're not chayiv anything? Amar Rav Elam Kasavar ein begidim and tam. He holds there is no tam to a gid. V'shani hasn't no akral kin lo yechem leYisrael is gid hanosha. Misha gidei asur psorei mutter. There's a special exclusion in the Isra of Gid Hanosha that it's only on an animal, it's only the Gid Hanosha of an animal that you're allowed to eat. Because the Torah says, Al Kain lo yechlu b'nei Yisrael is a Gid Hanosha, because of the Isra of Gid Hanosha, you can't eat it. But not for but there's no Isra of Gid Hanosha on something that you can't eat anyway. Yotz Zusha Gidei Yasur P'sarei Yasur. So that's why Rav Shimon would say, you're not chayiv anything for eating the Gid Hanosha of a non-kosher animal.
So you chayiv time for what? For chaylev and tmeya?
He's saying you're not chayiv anything. We're trying to understand. Rav Shimon Paiter, right? That was what he said right on the top of the yam. Shimon said you're pater altogether. So we're trying to analyze what does he say. You're not chayiv. It seems like you should be chayiv. If anything, you should be chayiv more when you eat the gid anosh of a non-kosher animal. So we're saying the reason why you're not chayiv is because ein begidim and tam, that the gid does not have a taste, so therefore it can't be chayiv for eating a non-kosher animal by eating an inedible portion of it, and it also is not chayiv for gid hanosha because there's an exclusion that says there's no gid hanosha, there's no issur gid hanosha of a non-kosher animal. So therefore, Rav Shimon would say you're off the hook altogether.
So when we say the mandama that says chayiv shtayim, what are those two things that he holds you chayiv on?
He holds yesh begin the menois and tam. The gid hanosha has a taste, so you chayiv first of all for eating a non-kosher animal, and secondly he holds that you chayiv also for gid hanosha. He holds they both, like we said in the previous Gemara, that they're both going to come at the same time. The isser gid, or you'll say that it's a isser chomer because it also applies to bnei noach, and therefore we won't say ein isser chal isser. So it's going from one extreme to the other. One mandama says yechayev for both, the other one says yechayev for neither. Mandama says yechayev for both. He holds yesh begid deminois and tam. It does have a taste, so you're going to be chayev for eating a non-kosher animal. And there's no such thing as ein isser chal isser, where the isser is more chamer, and over here it's more chamer because it also applies to bnei noach, like we said at the end of the previous Gemara. And the Manama says you're not chayiv on either one. Says ein begid deminois and tam, and he holds there's no isser of gid hanosha on a non-kosher animal.
So why is he not chayiv for behemoth tmeya?
So because we say ein begid deminois and tam, he holds that the gid is not edible.
Right.
And a
Okay.
non-inedible portion of an animal, you're not chayiv for eating of a behemoth tmei. If you eat the hoof of a behemoth tmei, you're not chayiv.
Oh, so it's only if you eat that gid, not if you eat the whole animal.
Oh, of
Talking about.
course, yeah, right.
Oh, okay,
Yeah,
okay, okay.
behemoth tmei is certainly
Yeah, yeah.
us.
Okay,
You
now
will
it makes sense.
you find all of a sudden there's a mandam who holds you could eat chazer. You were very surprised.
Right.
No, it's only the gid hanasha or other inedible portions. According to him, gid hanasha is inedible. According to other mandam, it is edible. Amrav Yehuda Amarav. Ha'echel gid hanasha shel nevela. We're moving to a different juxtaposition. Rather than a gid hanasha of a non-kosher animal, we're talking about a gid hanasha of a kosher animal, but did not have a shechita. Remeya mechayev shtayim. Remeya says yechayev two. V'chamayim ein yechayev alachas. You only chayev one. Moedim chacham leremeya ba'oichel gid hanasha shel oila v'shel shar niskol shechayev shtayim. But the chachamim will be moedim to remeya if rather than eating the gid hanasha of nevela, he eats the gid hanasha of oila of the shar niskol, that you'll be chayev too. So what's the over here? We're talking about being chayiv one or chayiv two. So the isser of gid hanasha certainly comes before the isser nevela. So the machlokes over here is whether we're saying that gid hanasha is again the gid is nice and tam. So therefore, Remeir will say yechayiv shtayim because the isser of nevela will apply as well. Will be a chal on the isser of gid hanasha because it's an isser kailul. In the Mishnah, we talked about an isser chamor, where it applies as well to bnei noach. Now we're talking about something else, an isser kailul, which is a larger isser. It applies to more cases than more than the original isser. And obviously, the isser gid hanasha only applies to the gid hanasha, while the isser nevela applies to the whole animal. So we'll say in such a case, we will say isser is chalal isser. Even though the isser gid hanasha came first, according to Reb Meir, we'll say isser kailul, that an isser, a larger isser, also applies. And obviously, this is going to be a machlokes whether an isser kailul applies. The chachamim disagree. They say an isser kailul is not chal on an isser. If you have an isser that's smaller, and then you have a second isser that applies to it, that applies to more, it won't apply. They say it won't apply. That gid hanasha cannot get a second isser on it. I mean, obviously, every nevela has a gid hanasha in it, so it will apply to the rest of the animal. When an animal comes to nevela, we don't say since it already was a isser gid hanasha included in it, therefore the isser nevela doesn't apply. No one would say such a thing. But legabi the gid hanasha itself, we would say it's an isser kailul. Even though it's an isser kailul, ain't isser chalal isser, and it can't have an isser nevela bichal on it. And now the case of shar niskol and oila, those are on that Remeir will be maida, because that's a different.
The Chacham will be Maida.
I'm sorry, the chum will be maida the yechayiv shtayim, because that is not only an isser kailul, it goes on the whole animal, but it's also an isser that brings with it an isser hana, and that's an isser chomer like we had in the Mishnah. So that has both factors that will mitigate against saying ein isser chal isser. Both the isser chomer chamura, that this has both the isser hana in addition to the isser achila. Gid hanash is only an isser achila. This expands it to be both an isser hana, both an kodshim. You're not allowed to have hana from it's asa meila, and shar niskal also you're not allowed to have hana from. So that the chacham will be maskim to Rameh. So now we want to identify who is this Manda Amar who's been chaylik on Rameir, who's threading a needle. He says a Isser Kailul itself is not sufficient, but if you have an Isser Kailul together with an Isser Chamer, then we'll say an Isser Kmichal Isser. Leslie, He holds that an Isser Kail just by itself, like we said from the first case of the Mishnah, of a Isser, an animal that became an Avela, that he says there's no two Isurim on the Gid Anasha, but he holds Isser Kail be'Isser Chomer Islay. If you have both of them, if it's Isser Kail together with the Isser Chomer, then he'll say, you do say Isser Chalis. Amar Rav Rabbi Yossi Aglili. This is Rabbi Yossi Aglili, and we're going to go in two steps. First, we're going to prove that Rabbi Yossi Aglili holds there's no Isser Chalal Isser just by an Isser Kailal, and then we'll deal with the second part, but it is Chal when you have an Isser Chomer together with an Isser Kailal. The Tanan. Tamei she'achol kodesh. A person who's Tamei who eats kodesh, that has an Isser Karas. Should keep in mind, it's important to keep in mind when we look at this proof that there are two types of problems with Tumah, right? You can't eat kachim that become Tamei are also to eat, and a person who became Tamei is also to eat kachim. Now, but there are there's differences between those Isurim. The Isser of eating kachim that became Tamei is just a lav, there's no karas, and there's no chatas. While a person who became Tamei eating kachim has an Isser of karas and chatas. You got that? Okay. It's hard, something I always have a hard time keeping straight in my mind. So so this is the case. It says in the Mishnah, Tamei she'achol kodesh, a person who's Tamei who eats kachim, bein kodesh tam, bein kodesh tamei, bein kodesh tar. Whether the kachim that he ate is Tamei or tar, chayiv. The Tanna Kama says it doesn't make a difference. Even though the kachim that you ate is Tamei, you're going to be chayiv, the person who eats it, who's Tamei, is going to be chayiv a chatas. It's not just on eating kachim that's tar, even kachim that's tamei. He's going to be mechalik. It depends whether the tar is chayiv or not, whether the kachim that you ate is tar or not. If it's tar, then he's a tamei eating kachim tar, you chayiv. But if it's tamei, then you potter. All he ate was a davar tamei. He didn't eat kachim that's tar. The Gemara is going to explain what the issue is. What does it mean? Amrulai, they said back to him, Af tamei she'achol zatar. According to you, you're saying that anytime someone eats kachim that's tamei, you're not going to be chayiv for the chatas for doing a b'shayig and cars if you do a b'mezid. But every person who's tamei, who eats kachim, the first thing that he does to get it into his mouth is he picks it up or it gets put into his mouth. At that point, he's touching kachim. The kachim becomes tamei. Before he swallows it, before he eats it, he's going to have made the kachim tamei. So how do you ever have someone being chayiv a chatas for eating kachim? It's a useless prohibition. Kivin shenagabai tameyu. Zok Gemara shapir ka'amrle rabbanu Rabbi Yossi Aglili. L'chayra, this is a starka taina. Zok Gemara va'amar Rava. Rava answers, "Benitma haguf ach kach nitma habasa kuli amle pligi dechayev." No, this is not a problem, because if the person became tamei, and then afterwards the basar became tamei, which is the case every time he eats a piece of kachim that's tar and he makes it tamei, even Rabbi Yossi Aglili would agree that yechayev. The Issachar kadim, because then we'll say the Issachar came first, and it's not a problem. He doesn't hold that you can't be chayiv for eating something that's tamei. The problem is just that if there was already an isser of eating it before the isser of eating, if there was already an isser of that the food was tamei that was there before his isser karas of where he became tamei took place, then the isser karas can't take effect. Kipligi benitma basav akak nitma guf. The machlokes that they have is where the basa became tamei before he became tamei, and therefore the isser karas Rabbi Yossi Aglili will say will not be chayiv. Rabbanan islay kailul. Rabbanan hold that even though the isser tuma came before the isser haguf, it's an isser kailul. the migdal chayiv achatichas tahiris, the alma mechayiv namachaticha tmeya. But obviously, the iser tuma is limited to only this piece of meat. The iser, when the basar became tame, is limited to this piece of meat. When he himself becomes tame, now he's aser to all kosher bialma. Rabbi Yosef less like iser kail. The migalei amrinun. He doesn't hold of the iser kail, and he says therefore it won't apply. He says it won't apply. You'll say ain't iser chalis, but if you don't have a problem with iser chalis, where he became, where the person became tame before the basa became tame, then even Rabbi Yosef Glili would agree that we would say it's not a problem of iser chalis, and you'd be chayiv. So now the Gemara says, okay, so we've proven the first part of the proposition. Rabbi Yosef Glili does not hold an iser kailul is going to be chayiv when you have an iser chalal iser. He doesn't hold iser kailul as an exception to the rule of ein iser chalal iser. So the Rabbi Yosef Glili he did iser kailul less like the iser kal yavi iser chama yachal iser kal. Umay niu. But why don't we say when you have an iser chomer? Let's say that the iser chomer should be yichal. The iser kal yavi iser chama yichal al iser kal. Umay tim is aguf. Shaitum is aguf bekaris. L'chayra. We should say this case is not just. We were saying that Rabbi Yosef Glili, we tried to say who the Rabbanim before. Those Rabbanim before had said that Issa Kailul doesn't work, but they also said that Issa Chamer together with Issa Kailul is going to be Chal on. We will say is going to be an exception to rule of Ein Issa Chal Issa. But this L'chayra, this case over here, where the person became Tamei Tumas Haguf on top of being where the object, the kachim was tamei, should also include within, in addition to an iser kail, that it's not just applying to this piece of meat, it's applying to everything. It also is an iser chamer, because we say a person becoming tamei, eating kachim, is chayiv karis, and a piece of meat that became, a piece of kachim that became tamei, is only a lav without karis. Amar Ravashi, man lemel tumas haguf chamura. No, it's not. Even though it's true that tumas haguf, where the person became tamei, it's mechayiv karis. It's not necessarily chamer. Dilma tumas basar chamur the less late to hire a mikvah. Since a person could go to the mikvah and be metar himself, so maybe the tumas haguf, which is not permanent, is less chamer than the tuma of a piece of kachim becoming tamei, which is permanent. It can never be reversed. Okay, so we're saying Rabbi Yosef Haglili is the man the Amr who said earlier, the Gid Hanosha of an Avela, that we say Isser Kailul is not sufficient to overcome Ein Isser Chalal Isser. Rabbi Yosef Haglili Leslie Isser Kailul. Is that true that Rabbi Yosef Haglili does not hold of Isser Kailul? V'atanya Shabbos v'Yom HaKippurim. If you have Shabbos that comes out on the same day as Yom Kippur, Shagig v'asa malacha. If he did malacha b'shagig, minayin shechayev al zeh ba'atzmai al zeh ba'atzmai. How do you know yechayev two lavin, two chatoyis, one for doing malacha on Shabbos and one for doing malacha on Yom Kippur? Tamalay b'Shabbos he Yom Kippurim hu. The pasuk says it's both. Torah says l'gabi Shabbos shesh yom tasa malacha b'yom hashvi Shabbos mikra kodesh kamalacha leisasu Shabbos he. That Shabbos applies in any case, and Yom Kippurimu. It says, Ach b'asal chodesh shvi hazeh Yom Kippurimu. Divrei Rabbi Yosef Haglili. Rabbi Yosef Haglili says the pasuk tells you that you're chayiv on each one, and as we're going to see, one of them, we're going to see which one comes first. We'll see what the cheshbon is. Why we're suggesting that one of them comes first, but even so, Rabbi Yosef Haglili says that you're going to be chayiv on each one. So you see, he does hold Isser Kail is Chalal Isser. Taisus asks a very obvious question on top. This is a pasuk. So how come you're asking from what did we learn out from a pasuk? We're saying that's different. So the Gemara's question is if there's a pasuk saying over here that Isser is Chalal Isser, let's learn out from here that Isser Kail is Chalal Isser. That's the kasha. Rabbi Kiva, but first we'll finish the brayso. So Rabbi Kiva, I made a chayav alachas. Rabbi Kiva says you only chayav one. Sholach Rav mishum Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina. Kachatzoah shel Mishnah ve'epach. He says this is taka the explanation um, that it was brought, but it happens to be it was incorrect, and it's really supposed to be the other way around. Taka Rabbi Kiva is the one who says you chayiv shtayim, and Rabbi Yisrael says you only chayiv one because he holds enis echal iser by iser kol. According to what we're saying now, Rabbi Yisrael says you only chayiv one. Shogeg b'Shabbos v'hezid b'Yom Kippurim chayiv. If he did a shogeg on Shabbos, but he was amazed on Yom Kippur, then he's chayiv. The chayiv of Yom Kippur is the one that you chayiv on. Hezid b'Shabbos v'shogeg Yom Kippurim potter. But if he was amazed on Shabbos and he's a shogeg on Yom Kippur, then he can't bring a chatas for the shogeg on Yom Kippur. My time, even though Rabbi Yossi Aglili said, Rabbi Yossi Aglili says he only chayiv one, it doesn't mean in either case. My time, and what's the reason? Amar Abaya, Shabbos kviya v'kaima Yom Kippurim beidina de kakavile. He holds the chiyuv of Shabbos really precedes the chiyuv of Yom Kippur, because Shabbos, when he created the world, he made on the seventh day was Shabbos, and every Shabbos after that was kavua from that first Shabbos. But Yom Kippur depends on the kfiyas of the Bezdin. So therefore it comes later when Bezdin was kaveya that month. That's when Yom Kippur was supposed to be on that day. So the chiyuv of Shabbos came first, and the chiyuv of Yom Kippur cannot be chal on the kfiyas of Shabbos on the day of Shabbos, and therefore if he was shogig b'Yom Kippur, he's going to be potter because the ein iser chal al iser, which is Rabbi Yossi Aglili's shita that iser kail is not going to be chal on another iser. The other way around, Shabbos can be chal on Yom Kippur because Shabbos is more chomer. It's a iser, but Yom Kippur is a iser kailul because Yom Kippur has both. In addition to not being able to do malacha, it also asks you from eating for the five inuyim. So this we seem to be saying over here, Rabbi Yossi Aglili, if Rabbi Yossi Aglili had said Yechayev for both, he would be holding of both Isser Chomer, Isser Kail. But we're saying in the end that it's not going to be Chayev on Yom Kippur. Shabbos is going to come first, and Yom Kippur is not going to be able to be Chal on it. Because he doesn't hold of Isser Kail. Amalei Rava. Rava says this whole analysis is incorrect. It doesn't make a difference when they're kavua in advance. Lamaisa, the Isser comes when we look to decide whether it's an Isser Chalal Isser, we look at when this Isser came into being. For example, the way I would look at it is we don't look at when an animal is conceived. That means that which animal was conceived first, or the Gid Anosha was going to be. It depends on when the Gid Anosha comes into being. Even though the Gid Anosha was supposed to be there from before, it depends on when the thing actually happens. So when Shabbos comes and when Yom Kippur comes, they both come at the same time, and therefore it's not a problem of Eser Chalas at all. So then we have a problem. So why Taka does Rabbi Yossi Aglili say that the Eser Yom Kippur can't be Chal? And he says you're not going to be Chayiv. We just said that if he makes a shogeg of Yom Kippur on Shabbos, he's not going to be Chayiv for that Chatas. Elamarava Shmadahava. This was a time, even though we said that it was Yom Kippur and Shabbos together, it wasn't really Yom Kippur. It was the Eish Shmad, where they asked people from observing Yom Kippur. They were masakin that they should, in order that Yom Kippur shouldn't be forgotten, they were masakin that they should observe Yom Kippur on Shabbos, in order that there should be a memory of it, and that wouldn't get the authorities riled up, because they know they observe Shabbos. That they didn't mind for some reason. So they were observing most of Yom Kippur on Shabbos. That's talk what they paskin. That's talk the way they understood it, that it wasn't a real Yom Kippur, and that's why you wouldn't be chayiv for being over on the on Yom Kippur. I mean, I don't know. I'm not sure what we. This has nothing really to do with the original din, right? This is um this is just going. We want to know what we said. Shalach Rabbi Yitzchak bar Yaakov bar Guyur Mishem de Rabbi Yochanan. The Rabbi Yochanan, we said it as Epach. If you're Shavah Gushavah, his Yom Kippurim Chayiv. But how could you be Chayiv for both according to the other man the Amram? According to the Chaylik on Rabbi Yisrael? What's shot in that?
Isn't that what Rashi's talking about? Alama Rava?
Let me see Rashi.
هذا شال خبيث خفت أدية ما كيبور مفتر لابا
Elam
بلتر
Rava, how does
بيسك
Rabbi Yitzchak the Adiyam Kippur Mifta Lava Plukta Rabbi Yisrael Kai? Oh, he's not going on the Machlekes at all. He said that we're re-characterizing what he said. But it's like, what did he say? Let me look at his words again. Shalach Rabbi Yisrael bar Yaakov bar Guyur Mishum de Rabbi Yochanan. Divrei Rabbi Yisrael Lamai the Abchan Shog B'Shabbat Yom Kippurim. Saying Lamai Divrei Rabbi Yisrael. It doesn't mean really Divrei Rabbi Yisrael because everyone would agree with this. Okay, I guess we're saying even according to the Divrei Rabbi Yisrael. Okay, it's a big change of the meaning of the words. Zak the Gemara. Am Rabbi Yehuda, v'habloi mimnei Yaakov. Right back in the Mishnah, that they were arguing about whether the din of Gid Hanasha. Where's the Mishnah again? We said noyig v'toyer and noyig v'tmeya. The Tanakama says Gid Hanasha is only noyig on a kosher animal, not on a non-kosher. You just says it's even noyig on a non-kosher animal because Gid Hanasha is aser from Bnei Yaakov, so it's an iser. It's an iser chomer. It's an iser that has. It's more extensive than the iser of Tumah, which only started by Har Sinai. Zok the Gemara. Tanya, Amulad Rabbi Yehuda, Chinemer al Kain leYochum neYisrael Bnei Yaakov. Doesn't say al Kain leYochum Bnei Yaakov, al Nemer al Bnei Yisrael, Bnei Yisrael at Sinai. How can you say that the iser of Gid Hanasha started earlier? That by the time of the story of the Gid Hanasha, where Yaakov was fighting in the Malach, it says it's al Kain leYochum Bnei Yisrael. They were first called Bnei Yisrael by Sinai. Like Nikum Bnei Yisrael at Sinai. Ela b'Sinai nemer. El shenichna b'mkaymer. Leida me'ezatam neselahem. L'chayr, it's like the Chacham. The Chacham are right that even though it was written earlier, it doesn't actually apply at that time. It was written earlier. It was written at the time of the Maisa, but that's the explanation of why it became Aser at Har Sinai. Masav Rava Yisuf Bnei Yisrael es Yaakov Aviyim. It says when the Yidden came down to Mitzrayim, we call them Bnei Yisrael. The Bnei Yisrael came down with Yaakov. So why are you saying that first called Bnei Yisrael by Har Sinai? It was well before that, when they first came to Mitzrayim, 210 years earlier. So that's still not at the time of the Maisa. So it's not. You see that Gid Hanasha was not at the time of the Maisa of Yaakov with the Malach, but rather at Har Sinai. But let it, okay, so you're saying it wasn't at the time of the Maisa, but let it be also when the Yidden came down to Eretz Yisrael. That's what they were called Bnei Yisrael. It says, Akein Lo'yechum Bnei Yisrael, and that's what they started being called Bnei Yisrael. Let it be also from them. Was the Torah given to be applied in dribs and drabs? It wasn't, there's not a bunch of options of when the Torah could be given. It either had to be b'shas Maisa or shas Torah. It's impossible to say that it was when the Yidden first called Bnei Yisrael. Those are only two potential options. You say at the time, this is an exception. The Torah told us the Maisa, and it said the Yidden can't eat it, and that at that time it became Asur, or at Har Sinai. To say that it happened when the Yidden first came down to Mitzrayim is Impossible. Tan Rabban. Eva min achai noig bebehema chaye v'oif. The din of Eva min achai. You're not allowed to heat an entire Aver of a live animal. If it was taken off of a live animal, even if you later shech that animal, that remains also forever. So that's noig bebehema chaye v'oif. It's noig on any kind of animal, whether a kosher animal, whether it's a behema chaye v'oif. Later on, we'll see Rameir's chaylik. He says it's only on a behema, not on a chaye v'oif. Bein tamein, bein tahir. Whether it's a tame animal, whether it's a tar animal. Even on a tame animal, there will be also an isser of Ever Menachai. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Elazar v'chachavim ma'imim. That's Rabbi Yehuda, but Rabbi Elazar and the chachavim say, Ein noig ela b'tahirin. It's only noig on tar animals, not on tame animals. Rabbi Yochanan Shnei Mikra Echad they all learn from the same pasuk. Rak chazak labilti echal hadam ki adam hu nefesh. There's a pasuk that says, dam is also to eat. And then there's another pasuk immediately adjoining it. Is in Dvarim Yud Beis Chav Gimel, and the next pasuk is Dvarim Yud Beis in the same pasuk. Lo yisachal nefesh im basar. You can't eat the nefesh with the basar, and this is Eva min achai. While the nefesh is there, while the animal is alive, you can't eat the basar. Yehuda was a savri. Rabbi Yehuda, we didn't say who the man. We said Rabbi Elazar and the Chacham, and now we say this Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Elazar savri. Kol sha'ata mitzvah al damei, ata mitzvah al levarv. From the juxtaposition of the two halachas of not eating dam and ever min achai, whenever you have isser dam, you also have an isser of ever min achai and dam. V'hani tmei nami hayav ata mitzvah al dam, ata mitzvah al levarv. And there's an isser dam on behemoth tmei that also extends. You shouldn't eat nefesh and abasar el abasar l'chudei. That means to tell you only you can eat basar from an animal that's dead. Kol shebsari mutar mitzvah alevar. Kol shebsari mutar yata mitzvah alevar. They darshan exactly the opposite. El abasar l'chudei, only when it's basar ki adamu nefesh. That tells you that you shouldn't eat it unless the basar is edible. Then you have this isser of imenachai. If the basar is also for a different reason, then there's no tzibui. Sakamar, Rabbi Yehuda lamalei kra. Why does Rabbi Yehuda need a pasuk to tell you that? Right, we said Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yehuda darshan from this pasuk, from the juxtaposition of the isser dam together with Eivim Menachai, that Eivim Menachai applies even on behemoth tmeya. Why do you need a pasuk with that? Lesi iser evil, lechal iser tuma. Let's say even if they're just two separate isurim, it should be chal anyway. We don't need a pasuk for that. Shechein isurim noigim nei noyach. Because according to Rabbi Yehuda, he holds that there's an iser ever menachai nei noyach, so it's an iser chamer, and it should be noig on dam, which is not noig on bnei noyach. It should be chal on top of the iser. The iser tuma, which is not noig to bnei noyach. So Gemara it's correct. You're right. According to Rabbi Yehuda, Yitaka would not need a pasuk because the iser ever menachai would be chal on the iser behemoth tmeya. V'chi iser kral Rabbi Elazar. You just need it for his partner. We said Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yehuda were the two man amrim who said that you need a pasuk. The pasuk tells you that Ever Menachai is naig by behemoth tmeya, so you have to add on to that. We have to have a pasuk, because otherwise it will be ein isachalis. Tani nami hachi. We have a brisa that says exactly this. Ever Menachai naig by behemoth chai v'oif bein behemoth tmeya bein tahira shenema rachazak l'b'diachal adam kol she'atam mitzaval damei atam mitzaval levarv. Exactly like we said, we explained our Mishnah. That we explained this assertion of the Gemara. Divrei Rebbe Elazar. We quote this b'shem Rebbe Elazar. We don't include Rabbi Yehuda because according to Rabbi Yehuda we don't need the pasuk. They say that only those things that you mitzvah on the basar, you're also going to have an isser of Eivim Menachai, and therefore it's excluded. So that's the Shitas Machlokes Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yehuda against the Chacham. And now we have a third sheet. He says it's only noyig on a behema tahira, because he says the pasuk says, we're going to explain in a minute the reason. Amar Rav Bashmuel, Amar Rav Chizda, Amar Rav Bashila, Amar Rav Chizda, Vitem Rabbi Yosef, Amar Rav Basimi, Amar Rav Chizda, Vitem Rabbi Yosef. My time of the Rameya. What's the reason of the Rameya? Amar Krav is a vakta, Mibekarcha, Umitzaincha. The pasuk by right next to this is Dvarim Yud Beis Chaf Aleph, 2 psukim before the pasuk of Evim Nachai says you should shecht your bakar and your tzoyin. That's to the exclusion of chayis. Chayis, they're not. If you don't shecht them, they're not going to have an iser of evim and achai. They're going to be excluded. So Kotar Yehuda, Kotar Meir, both chayis and oif, as well as behemoth tmei, are all excluded from the iser of evim and achai. Okay, we'll stop over here and